Well, somebody at the New York Times has figured out why President Trump is still here. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, opinion columnist Thomas Edsall has a very lengthy piece, the kind that you can only get away with in the New York Times these days because there'll be enough people who will claim to have read it that you can justify your elevated reputation. But Thomas Edsall actually consults with a variety of so-called experts in politics and psychology and behavioral economics. And under this banner of why Trump persists, he starts out with this this idea: the failure of the American electorate to rise up in opposition to President Trump, whose outrages are well documented, suggests that voters are less tolerant, less empathetic, and less insistent on integrity than many believe. And he describes a nation deeply ambivalent about immigration, race, equality, fairness, and even about the ground rules of democracy itself. Now, Bill, there's a lot more to this story than we're going to get into, but I thought it was interesting that a guy who sees the country going in a direction that he doesn't like, therefore presumes that there's something wrong with the people who are directing it. In other words, with you, with the voter.
Right. The people made their choice, and he disagrees with the choice, so we need a new American people.
And later in the article, they talk about how the value of education in making people more open to diverse ideas, diversity of people, diversity of countries of origin, and things like that. That really it's a lack of education, so-called, that keeps people coming back to President Trump.
Yeah, because all the stupid people vote for Trump, and all the smart people vote for Hillary Clinton. And the reason they vote for Hillary Clinton is they're smart. And the reason they're smart is because they go to Harvard University and Berkeley and so on, where the presence of any viewpoint other than the one that's officially tolerated is not just removed, not just invited off of campus, but often results in fire bombings and riots and so on. So I don't know where we would be without our university system to teach us the incredible, not just teach us, educate us in the incredible benefits of tolerance, rational debate, respect for the other person's point of view, all the things that this fascist is sure he has. If he's saying that the American people are stupid, that's why they vote for Trump. And if you go to college, you get a much more appreciation of diversity and tolerance, then he's just plain wrong. And a better article, certainly a more interesting article, and a considerably shorter one, I might add, would be, why does the New York Times continue to persist? Why? You know, I was born in New York City. I'm not proud of it, but there it is. There is a quality about New Yorkers, and it is perfectly summed up in that classic New Yorker cover where you see Manhattan, then there's the Hudson River, then there's flyover country, then there's the coast. Just like Manhattan is the country, and then the boroughs apparently have some minor effect, and we've heard of Los Angeles. This view of the country from New York has been here since there's been a New York, and New Yorkers have a particular vanity about how well informed they are, because they live in the Big Apple, the spindle of the universe, and they see everything, and they have a chance to but it is absolutely 100% absolutely false. The people who write pieces like this commute to work in limousines. They get out of their glass skyscrapers, get into a car, drive to another glass skyscraper, and go upstairs. They're not hanging out with the people that are cooking in the restaurants. They're not down there handling trash with the people that work in New York City. They're the people who know better, and they're the people that don't have to get their hands dirty, and they're the people who can talk about how obviously, if the country were just as smart as I was, they think exactly the same way that I do. Scott, there is a disease that has been fatal to every civilization in the history of mankind, and certainly we're seeing the signs of it here. It is a disconnect from reality driven by arrogance and narcissism of people who think that they're smarter than other people, whose entire emotional construct is to perpetually reinforce how smart they are compared to other people. And because they are so certain of their vast moral and intellectual superiority, they are utterly blind to any evidence to the contrary. These are the kind of people who would draw a map, and if the map predicts a river delta, and then they go up to the bridge and take a look, and they see a granite coastline, then these are people who assume that the coastline is wrong. And this is what we have to deal with in this Republican democracy that we've set up for ourselves. And because these people are so self-serving, because they're so good at telling the story, it's not because they're so bright. Have you ever met any of these celebrity actors? I have it on reliable sources. I used to be a limousine driver. I've had on reliable sources that Cher, who's got political opinions that we get to hear about all the time, considered Mount Rushmore was a natural feature. That's just how it was there what's happening is the worst people in the country in terms of their personal morality. And I can say worst because the word morality still means something to me. Goodness, evil, patterns of behavior that you should aspire to, that are virtuous, and ones that you should be ashamed of. All of these things are true. And when you look at the people who are making these claims for how smart they are, you find that pretty much universally, the entire argument is predicated around two base motivations. One of them is to show people how smart I am. And if you really felt that you were smarter than other people, you wouldn't have to show anything. You wouldn't have to get into this argument about, only stupid people disagree with me. I never said that stupid people disagree with me. I don't believe that at all. I just don't think they have enough facts. But put that aside for a second. The other thing that drives it is the need to have a moral justification to do whatever they want to, whenever they want to. And so this is why the liberal elites are talking about this dystopian future that we live in, record economy, record low unemployment, the country's safer than it's ever been, this dystopia. The city's on fire, the world is burning, and all the rest of it.
Well, Bill, here's some reinforcement for that characterization that you just gave of the people on the left, because as part of Thomas Edsall's column in the New York Times, he brings in Karen Stenner, a political psychologist and behavioral economist, who apparently at some point predicted the rise of figures like Donald Trump, given the social conditions that we now face. And she says this: I don't think I would agree that Trumpian conservative stands on immigration, race, and homelessness are more natural or the default position. Communities with a good balance of people who seek out diversity, complexity, novelty, new and exciting experiences, etc., and those who are disgusted by and averse to such things, avoid them and tell others to do likewise, tend to thrive and prosper in human evolution. So what she's saying is, we need both. We need the people who seek out new experiences and delight in the new discoveries of life. And then we need people like you, Bill.
That's right. That's exactly what she's saying. So in order to validate this elitist, narcissistic worldview, in order to buttress that argument, he didn't go to people. He went to another elitist narcissist who, and by the way, we should be very grateful that she took the time to explain it to us, who carefully explains that people like us. Can you read that list again? Because I found it was interesting. I'm sorry to keep making you do this.
No, that's okay, right here. And this is the balance that she's saying that we should need to strike. And by the way, in the course of saying this, she says that people on the left, for example, shouldn't describe conservatives as racist just because they have concerns about immigration. They should listen to them because you can't suddenly force new things on people who are averse to new things.
Just read me, if you don't mind, that.
Communities with a good balance of people, and here it is on the left, who seek out diversity, complexity.
Period. Stop. Hold it. I just want to take these one by one. Who seek out diversity. What does that mean? I mean, certainly.
They go to Whole Foods.
Certainly if they seek out diversity in the same way that their priesthood, which is the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, if they seek out diversity in the same way that the Golden Globe seeks out diversity as part of their worldview, then that diversity that they're seeking out is white, rich, beautiful, and between the ages of 22 and trying to look 45. So the idea that there's diversity in this liberal elite is nonsense. And furthermore, the idea that they somehow are seeking out intellectual diversity, like we want new challenges to our worldview, is immediately and I mean violently discredited by the behavior of leftists when you deal with people on campus coming to talk about something different. I remember hearing different opinions when I was in college, and it got me thinking. But anyway, let's go on. So there was diversity.
And she's clearly making a distinction between people who are open and people who are closed.
Right.
And the conservatives being closed. Okay, so she says diversity, complexity, novelty, new and exciting experiences.
Complexity, novelty, and new exciting experiences. Let's start with complexity. When you ask somebody a question like this, let's say that your theory about man-made global warming is correct and that the Earth has just a few years left before irreversible climate damage is done. And then you say we're approaching 450 parts per million carbon dioxide, but 80 million years ago, carbon dioxide was 3,000 parts per million, and the Earth was able to recover from that. I'm not saying that you don't have a serious problem here. What I'm asking you is, why is it that the Earth could be at 3,000 parts per million carbon dioxide, get there without any human intervention, because it was 80 million years ago, and then recover from that without any human intervention? If you could explain that to me, I'd be much more able to really be able to make sense out of the point you're making. When you make that kind of conservative argument to these people of complexity, the smoke starts to come out of their ears, and they walk away. And they probably call you a racist, too. So I'm not going to buy the complexity argument, because I've never seen a liberal argument that was complex at all, ever, never. I had spent the first 10 years of my life living in a state of not in fear, but in apprehension and caution that I had better be careful, because someday I'm going to go out there and I'm going to run into the liberal Goliath, and he's going to hand me my butt. He's going to make all these arguments that I didn't see before. He's going to tell me all of these things that I should have considered, and I didn't. And I've embarrassed the team now, and I've let everybody down. And I kept expecting it, then I expected it less and less and less. Finally, I came to realize, no, you don't have to worry about this, because that person doesn't exist. These arguments are never tested. They're simply statements. And the example I just gave you, which is a perfectly reasonable scientific question to ask, is utterly rejected. And furthermore, it makes me a heretic and likely in need of a re-education camp. So complexity was one. Novelty is another, right? Novelty. Is there a more enclosed society than Manhattan in the United States? In other words, is there a single group of people in America who live in the kind of actual, I'm not even talking about a philosophical bubble now, I'm talking about a bubble of contacts in terms of, I live in a city of 12 million people, and 11.5 million of them live down there in the dirty streets, and they prepare my food for me. Is there ever been a part of the country that is that far out of touch with the actual reality of life on the ground? If I were to see New Yorkers like this guy sitting down at a construction site, eating a ham sandwich with workers, real workers, the guys who build the buildings that they live in, so then they can later, disparage guys like the workers. If I were to see them having experiences like this, then this would have at least some weight. They'd still be wrong, but at least they'd be honestly wrong. For them to say that people like them seek out novelty is absolutely insane. There is nothing more predictable and nothing more isolated than the day-to-day life of an executive in New York City. It is the most self-contained existence in the United States and possibly in the world. And then the final one was what after novelty?
And new experiences.
New experiences.
Similar to novelty.
Yeah, well, you know what a new experience would be? A new experience would be traveling to Charlotte or Des Moines. Those would be new experiences. If you have traveled to Paris your entire life, and all you've ever seen is Paris, and you consider yourself to be a worldly person because you see Paris once a year for every year of your life, You're no more worldly than somebody who routinely goes to Cincinnati. You can argue that Paris is a prettier city than Cincinnati, and you can argue that Paris has more culture than Cincinnati, and you'd be right on both counts, but you certainly would not be making an argument for novelty. You're going the same place every year. It's like this. It's like a family that every single year loads up the station wagon and goes to visit the world's largest twine ball. It may not be as interesting as Paris, but an annual visit to the world's largest twine ball is in fact about as much of a new experience as constantly going to Paris. And this is the example I'm talking about. These people talk, oh, well, we live in New York City, so there's so many new experiences. There's so many different restaurants. There's so many different cultures. There's so many different foods. Did I mention restaurants? Yes, true. You, in your rich, elite, white, upper class, snobby, intellectualist world, get to eat just a tremendous assortment of really delicious food from around the world. But what you don't do is you don't talk to the people that make it, ever. Now you might say, oh, Giuseppe, wonderful, because you want to get a better table next time, but you don't ever talk to them. You don't sit down and talk to them. If you think the people that go to Thai restaurants or Indian restaurants or whatever, who pride themselves on their multicultural experience that these poor, knuckle-dragging savages out in flyover country will never experience, you're talking about from your point of view, you're talking about the machines that cook your food. In the real world, in the world that they're so busy disparaging, people work with other people who are not like them. Again, if you think this is all posturing on my part, take a photograph of the Academy Awards or the Golden Globes or the board of directors at any one of these New York skyscrapers and compare it to a photo taken from a Walmart in Montgomery, Alabama, and tell me which one is showing you the most diversity, which one is showing you the most social contact, which one is showing you the most respect for other people's opinions, which one is showing you more competence, all of it. So this entire argument is why New York is what it is. And there was a time when New York could afford this kind of snobbery, because there was a time when New York was, in fact, the spindle of the world. It really was. It was the center of the universe. And every day that world gets further and further behind them, because the people who are now in New York are now 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 generations of New Yorkers. There's nobody going to New York from the country anymore like there was in the 40s and 50s after the war, people moving to New York to start businesses. That's long gone. So they live in a little island. And the best description I ever heard of New York was, and again, I was born there, is that I was born in Manhattan, is that New York is the perfect prison because the guards believe that, because the prisoners believe that they're the guards.
Bill, here's the final question, and we're going to have to keep this short because we're running up against news, weather, and traffic at the top of the hour. But this is in Thomas Edsall's column in the New York Times. He quotes Linda Skitka, a professor of psychology at the University of Illinois at Chicago.
Another professor. And we'll talk about reaching out to the vast spectrum of thought in this country.
There's no dishwasher, at the local fast food joint here. But anyway, this is an interesting thing. She did a study in 2002. And did a paper based on the durability and strength of liberal versus conservative beliefs about poverty and how those break out. And listen carefully to this, Bill. She says it's much easier to get a liberal to behave like a conservative than it is to get a conservative to behave like a liberal. Liberals act like conservatives when resources are scarce and cognitive load is high, meaning they're distracted, and aid serves secondary rather than primary needs. And basically what she's saying is that when it comes right down to it, liberals aren't going to help other people in poverty when they themselves are struggling or when they're distracted. Conservatives only act like liberals when they're asked to consider helping a person with internally controllable causes of need who has convincingly reformed. So, sorry.
The entire, I'm glad she mentioned that, because I think the entire structure of the American government is based on internally controllable causes of need. I think the idea of internally controllable causes of need is the cornerstone of Western civilization. In fact, internally controllable consequences of need is the factual foundation for all of Western history, art, and achievement. When you throw a phrase like that at me, I know exactly what that means. And what that phrase means is, I am now going to try and assemble as many syllables as I possibly can to make an opinion sound like science.
But what she's saying, again, Bill, is positive for conservatives. She's saying,
no, she's not.
She's saying,
no, she's not.
You're not. I don't think you're hearing it the way she's saying it, and it is too many words. But basically, she's saying, when a conservative sees a bum who's a bum because it's his own fault, but who has reformed and is trying to turn his life around, a conservative will jump in compassionately and help that person. But when a liberal sees the same bum, but times are tough, or she's got to get the kids to soccer practice, she'll say, "Screw the bum! I've got to get the kids to soccer practice." And so she's more self-centered, and in the terms of this psychologist, that she's more conservative. Basically, she's not going to help the bum because it interferes with her lifestyle.
Let me help clarify this for the learned professor who undoubtedly has many PhDs. If times are tough and resources are scarce, liberals act like conservatives because there are no liberals when times are tough and resources are scarce. There aren't any. When you go to a village in India that is breaking ships, for example, probably the most unpleasant job there is in the world, you don't get a whole lot of discussion about Nietzsche's impact on Western thought because there are no liberals there, because people have to work. That's why. And this is why liberalism is so much more popular in the cities than it is in the country. Because if you're a farmer, you have to get up early and you have to go and shovel manure, and you have to, castrate hogs and do all the rest of that filthy work that is necessary to be done on a daily basis. But if you live in New York City and you're making $700,000 a year and you have your own chauffeur, you have your own nanny, you have your own everything, then you can afford these occupations like being professors of psychology and discussing what would happen in case of our internalized conflicts of need and all the rest of this nonsense. But when you get into the real world and you have to start dealing with the reality of the world from the point of view of something who has to make something, you find there aren't very many liberals, that the whole thing is essentially a product of the froth of prosperity. That's what liberalism is. It's the philosophy that comes off of the froth of the prosperity generated by hardworking people who tend to be conservatives. This intellectualism, I can prove to you how the average American worker feels about things by citing a study by my good friend Dr. So-and-so over at NYU. This thing is the disease. Intellectualism has. I made this argument last night when I was talking about the Cold War and Robert McNamara. I can defend this argument with numbers. If you want to talk about the number of human beings killed over the course of our history, not Americans, just in general, number of human beings killed. Number one killer of humans is disease. The number two killer of humans is intellectuals. And the number three killer of human beings is war. In that order. And if you don't believe me, you could take all of the casualties of all of the wars, all of them, and they don't come to half of the number of people that were killed in 1 year in China by an intellectual with an idea. So I am telling you, this is the end. It's the end of the cycle, this kind of thinking. And now we have to see. I've said this from the day I started writing 15, 20 years ago, these many years ago, Scott. The big wheel of the cycle of civilization has been the same in every single case throughout history, and we are right at that point where it drops off the cliff, and there would be no reason at all, none, to suspect that we would be any different from any of these other collapses in history, except that for the first time in history ever, common people, not professors at universities publishing in papers, regular working common people with common sense for the first time in human history have the ability to directly communicate with one another exactly like we're doing now. This is the only thing that's different, and it's the only thing that holds out hope for us to stave off the kind of collapse that is caused by the arrogance, the narcissism, and the just plain meanness of people who write long editorials in the New York Times.
And if you'd like to be part of supporting this wellspring of hope for the future of our country and the world, you can go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. We're also grateful to our friends over at the Patriot Post, America's News Digest. We'll provide a link to the Patriot Post, and we hope you click it in the description below. And our buddies who have been patrons of ours over at patreon.com/Bill Whittle. We thank you for that support as well. We're going on a cruise, but you may know that by now, but just go to the website and click on the big boat, and you will find out all the details you need to know. But make sure you book that cabin soon, because at some point they have to shut that off. The ship will be full, and you will be waving your hanky from the shore, and we don't want to see that happen.
No, we don't.
For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.